In early 2006, Argentinian law enforcement organized a massive search party to locate one of their own who vanished while on duty one evening. Hour after hour stretched by until, at long last, they found the missing person late the following day. And for the longest time, he could only mutter one phrase: "They followed me all night." When he finally recovered enough to share his story, few of his coworkers believed him, but none of them could deny that he seemed absolutely terrified by what had happened, nor could they deny the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. He was found over a dozen miles away from where he had vanished. You won't want to miss this one. Sergio had risen through the ranks in General Pico and was eventually assigned to the División Abigeato, or Anti-Cattle Rustling Division. It may sound like a position out of an old Western movie, but for this region, it was an essential service provided to the community. In short, the area around General Pico is highly agricultural. Lots of people make their living raising livestock. In fact, farmers in the area are renowned worldwide for their beef exports. With such a lucrative aspect of the economy at stake, it is in everyone's best interests to protect citizens against petty thieves who try to steal cattle when no one is looking. Now, as part of his routine duties, Sergio would patrol the unpaved roads that wound through the countryside, connecting the communities of Dorila, Spaluzzi, and Trebalores. Usually, these nightly trips came and went without anything out of the ordinary happening. In fact, you could even call the trips through the darkened fields and empty pastures peaceful. But lately, things had been different, meaning that Sergio and his partner had been seeing odd things while on patrol. In short, they began noticing odd lights hovering over the farmland. Like any of us, they thought at first that these might be regular aircraft, from planes to helicopters. But it soon became obvious that this wasn't the case. These lights didn't behave like any conventional aircraft that Sergio was familiar with. And what's more, other officers on patrol with Sergio started seeing them too. Now we know this from Sergio himself. Researcher Scott Corrales translated a lot of the newspaper reports that were published on him. On March 8, 2006, Sergio filled in reports from the local paper El Diario de la Pampa about the events of the days and weeks leading up to his disappearance. He said this: "Previously, my partner and I have seen thousands of those red lights. We once chased one right to the backtop highway. It was raining, and then we never found any traces of it, only our pickup truck. 2 weeks earlier, a fellow officer was driving along the access road to Agostoni and saw a light in the middle of the road. He thought it was a car and flashed his headlights at it, but the light wouldn't budge. When he was about to overtake it, the light moved from one side to another and flew straight up." As proof of these weird sightings, Sergio even managed to capture a little video footage. The video, filmed in February of 2006 and shared with reporters, allegedly showed a round light hovering in the darkness. It doesn't move much, but it seems to be rotating on its axis, almost like a globe. And so these mysterious lights became almost an obsession for Sergio. While his main job was to prevent cattle rustling, each night he found himself with a secondary mission to get to the bottom of what was causing these strange lights in the night above Argentina. He had no idea that the source of the lights would find him. Well, the evening of Thursday, March 2nd, 2006 is like any other. It is warm, a storm is brewing somewhere off in the distance, but won't be in the area until early the next morning. And now, Sergio is on his evening rounds, riding his motorcycle and enjoying the pleasant evening. As he makes his way through the countryside, Sergio's patrol takes him near Dorila, along a dirt road between some massive cane fields. It's a narrow extension, no more than 10 feet wide at the most, but well maintained and in good condition. For nearly a quarter of a mile, the dirt path snakes past La Barrancosa, a local ranch, before joining up with the main road. It's an isolated spot. Tonight, there's no one else to be seen, no other traffic, and certainly no pedestrians. And just before 9:30 p.m., Sergio brings his bike to a stop. Although he won't be able to tell anyone what it is until days later, he has spotted something coming towards him in the distance. He thinks it might be another car, but in the back of his mind, Sergio wonders if it might not be something stranger. He tries not to think of the weird lights that he and his partners have been seeing for months now, so Sergio turns off his motorcycle and then he steps onto the dirt road, never taking his eyes off the thing in the distance. He removes his helmet, reaches down to his belt, and unclips his walkie-talkie to call for backup. But Sergio remembers something. He's too far out of range for the walkie-talkie to reach anyone, so he instead flashes out his cell phone and dials a friend, a fellow officer who is off duty this night. And after providing his location and asking his coworker to contact the police station for backup, Sergio only adds one phrase as an explanation. Something strange is going on. It's the last thing that anyone hears from him, at least for now. Sergio's coworkers try desperately to reach him, to call back, to get a hint as to what is happening, but he never picks up. And now, fearing the worst, the station immediately dispatches a squad car from the General Pico area to where Sergio made his last transmission. They race down the dirt road and finally reach the spot 15 minutes later. And what they find shocks them. There, lying in the dirt, are some of Sergio's belongings. His helmet sits in the middle of the road as if he had dropped it, along with his cell phone and his walkie-talkie. Just beside it stands the motorcycle, a small Honda 125cc owned by the police department. Leaving your bike and helmet is one thing, but no one can explain why Sergio would have left behind the walkie and his phone. I mean, normally, if you were in danger, you wouldn't set off into the wilderness without any way to communicate. But even this isn't the weirdest. No, the detail that really leaves the other police officers upset is the fact that there, alongside everything else, is Sergio's pistol. But here's what's stranger than anything. The firearm isn't intact. It's in 3 separate pieces scattered across the road, and they are partly covered by dirt, as if Sergio panicked, disassembled his weapon, and then took off across the cane field. And so Sergio's coworkers begin shouting into the night, but they never hear anything. The storm is closer now. The only response that they get to Sergio's name is the distant rumble of thunder. By 1 a.m, it's begun raining. More and more law enforcement arrive on the scene, but Sergio still hasn't returned. Slowly, the searchers begin spreading out from the road into the fields, trying to use their lights to pick up any hints as to Sergio's trail. Well, it goes on like this for hours. Commissioner Roberto Ayala from Police Regional Unit 2 orders a thorough search of the site. Everyone starts doing their best to look for any clues in the steady rain that settled over the area. And soon, it's a full-blown search and rescue operation with members of other various departments and units coming from miles around to help in the effort. And still, there is no sign of Sergio. As each minute ticks by, the rain is washing away crucial details, making it harder and harder to figure out exactly what happened the night before. Finally, around 7:30 the next morning, 10 full hours after Sergio's disappearance, Juan Carlos Tierno and Ricardo Bedouts arrive on site in Dorila, the small town closest to where Sergio vanished. Juan is the Minister of Safety, Government and Justice, while Ricardo is the Provincial Chief of Police. They both ask to be briefed on Sergio Pucheta's disappearance. Now, this part is a little bit odd and guaranteed to raise a few eyebrows. When he hears about the strange lights that Sergio has reported, Juan Carlos asks for copies of the videos that have been taken of them. The General Pico police station grants his request, and Juan and Ricardo head back to the capital shortly before noon. Now, exactly what they do with the videos and why they requested them is unclear. Well, in the meantime, the search is still underway, and there's no sign of Sergio, so the officers began their examination of his belongings. Nothing is odd except for one strange detail that they can never account for. You see, all of the contacts in Sergio's cell phone were missing. In fact, the only outgoing call that is displayed was his call to his friend for backup. Everyone is at a loss because this case is getting weirder and weirder by the hour. But then, late that morning, there's a break. someone has discovered what appears to be a trail that might have belonged to the missing policeman. It was hard to see earlier with everyone trampling over it in the darkness, but it gets a little clearer just a short distance from the road. Now, the officers can see clear indications that Sergio took off into the field. Again, here's the weird thing. It goes on for a long time. In fact, this new lead takes investigators over 1.5 miles from where Sergio vanished. But then, the trail goes cold. It simply seems to stop, leaving everyone with no idea of the direction that Sergio went. So, the search area widens. If Sergio made it nearly 2 miles on foot, who knows where he might be. Hour after hour, police officers scour the fields and then, when they're sure they haven't overlooked any clues, expand the investigation. Now finally, around 4:30 on the afternoon of Friday, March 3rd, nearly 20 hours after Sergio vanished, a crackle comes over the radio. The missing officer has been found. There is one question on everyone's mind. Where? A response comes over the radio between the towns of Kemu Kemu and Trili. No one can believe it. Remember, Sergio had abandoned his motorcycle. He was traveling on foot. But if you look at the area where he was found, this is almost 12.5 miles away from his last known location. Granted, anyone could walk that far in the amount of time that Sergio was missing, right? But who would do that in the middle of the night in the rain? And most importantly, why? Well, details slowly start to pour in about how Sergio was found. Apparently, it wasn't even a member of the search party who found him. It was actually a local farmer who stumbled across Sergio. And the farmer had been vaguely aware of the search and rescue operation and had immediately contacted the authorities when he found a young policeman. You see, according to his testimony, the farmer was returning home from the General Pico along Provincial Route 1 when he noticed someone curled up in a fetal position on the shoulder of the road. And when the farmer got out to check on the person, he found the stranger completely numb and unable to speak. Well, the first official to arrive on the scene was Commissioner Roberto, and he found the farmer standing in the middle of the road, facing away from Sergio. Well, Roberto rushes to Sergio's side, but not too quickly. The officer looks too fragile to rush in, so when he gets close enough, he kneels down to talk to him, and Sergio looks completely in a state of shock. I mean, he could barely move, and so Roberto starts talking gently to Sergio, trying to get him to relax. He explains who he is, that the chief of Regional 2 is beside him now, and that he's safe and that he's there to help him. But Sergio doesn't even react. He's still panicked, obviously. So Roberto starts guiding him through some gentle breathing exercises, breathing in through his nose and out his mouth to calm him down and hopefully help him open up. Now here's what Roberto told reporters. Gradually, Pucheta began to loosen up and I was able to examine his hands without finding any abnormalities. The same occurred with his head, although I couldn't see his face. He said his eyes burned, keeping his face concealed. When he stretched his lower extremities, he haltingly began to say, "They followed me all night." When asked by who, he replied, "It was 2 of them. They had red eyes." When asked about his pursuer's appearance, he said, "They looked transparent and had red eyes. Their eyes made my head hurt." Well, Roberto has no idea what to make of a statement like that, and all he knows is that there is one of his own who has been rescued and that he is in need of immediate medical attention. And so Roberto immediately radios for an ambulance, and now there's nothing to do but wait. But the entire time, Sergio keeps mumbling that same phrase, repeating it over and over again. "They followed me all night, they followed me all night, they followed me all night." Now finally, the ambulance arrives. Roberto and some of the other police officers help Sergio to his feet. The rescued man immediately breaks down, something that everyone around him encourages him to do, hoping it might make him feel better. Slowly and painfully, he staggers into the ambulance, keeping his face hidden the entire time. Now, once he helps Sergio sit down in the patient compartment, Roberto asks him if he can raise his head. Sergio does this, but still weeping and keeping his eyes shut. Now, he may not be in great shape, but there's nothing they can do for him here. He needs to see a doctor. Well, the ambulance takes off. Just a little while later, Sergio's stretcher comes wheeling into the emergency room. On hand to render aid are 3 nurses and a doctor by the name of Covea, who administer to Sergio's immediate needs. They strip him naked, taking note of anything out of the ordinary as they did so. Now, the entire time, Sergio is complaining about his fingers and feet itching and burning, but the doctors don't see anything strange. In fact, the only thing that they note is after taking off his shoes, Sergio's feet seem to be covered in blisters, but these were most likely caused by how far he had walked. In fact, most of Sergio's trauma seems to be psychological. He admits that he is nervous and incredibly upset, so doctors began treating his case as a confusional episode in their own words. After collecting urine and blood samples, Dr. Covea orders that Sergio be kept under strict observation for at least 24 hours. While Sergio is asleep, the lab results come back, and to everyone's shock, nothing seems to be wrong with him. All the results are normal. And after Sergio wakes up and talks a little more clearly, Dr. Covea and his associates state that Sergio seems to be lucid, hydrated, and with a balanced cardiovascular and respiratory condition. He exhibits no signs of physical trauma or violence. But there's one question that everyone wants to know: what happened last night? Well, it takes Sergio a little while to come to his wits, but when authorities visit him for questioning, he finally shares all the details of what happened in the cane field, or at least what he remembers. The first thing Sergio is asked is why he abandoned his belongings, his service pistol, all on the road. And the only answer he gave is he didn't know. Now, this isn't a great answer and a pretty discouraging start to questioning. And at first, everybody is worried that Sergio won't open up at all, but he finally shares what happened. He explained that he was driving his motorcycle when he reached the wilderness area. Now, he stopped because he saw a pair of red lights similar to that of a car, and then they vanished. And so he got off his motorcycle to see if he could hear any noise, and he did not. So he went to get back on his motorcycle and was just about to put his helmet on, and that's when this red light appeared in front of him, pressing against his face very hard. Whatever strange force this was stood in front of him and sort of hypnotized him. He reported that he can only move his hands and nothing else, and that he wasn't able to move the rest of his body. He described it as if the light was going all over his body, and this is an incredibly bizarre description. After this, Sergio said that the light began heading into the sky, rising further and further into the air, and at the same time, he noticed what he called a considerable head and eye ache. Now, naturally, he thought this came from the light itself, and so he took off in an attempt to get away from it. He had no memory whatsoever of discarding his cell phone or his walkie-talkie, nor did he recall disassembling his pistol. In fact, the next thing Sergio knew, he was moving across the field, although he said, "I can't recall if I was walking or running, they were always behind me." Now, naturally, everybody asks the question, who, Sergio, who was always behind you? And Sergio said that at some point, he noticed that he was being chased by what he said were 2 small, red-eyed creatures. These beings were, in Sergio's words, smaller than him and somewhat transparent. They had large heads and clear red eyes. Sergio put heavy emphasis on the fact that these eyes were very red. And whatever these things were, they did not chase him on foot. No. Instead, they seemed to levitate above the cane field and kept harassing him the entire time, beaming thoughts directly into his own mind. But no matter what Sergio did, he could not shake them, and simply continued further and further into the wilderness in a mad dash to lose his pursuers. As disturbing as all of this is, it gets worse. In addition to being taunted by these 2 mysterious entities, they would telepathically tell him that he was not the first or last to be taken from where they had found him. They even explained to him that they were going to take another fellow officer who also travels alone. As to why these things were taking people, Sergio could only guess that the creatures were utilizing his mind as if they were performing tests. From what Sergio could remember, these tests took on a variety of forms. At one point, Sergio said that his life flashed before his eyes, although he was fairly certain this didn't come from himself. He thinks that the being somehow made him see it, and he said that in a matter of seconds, he saw events, in his words, that from when I was little until now that I'm older, everything good or bad that ever happened to me. Another one of these life tests, as Sergio called them, was even stranger. When asked to provide an example, Sergio explained that when he reached a cornfield at a distance of some 10 meters, he saw a large figure that appeared to be chewing the corn cobs and was breaking something. It was much taller and larger than him, and Sergio felt very scared and just stood there staring at it. And it began getting closer and closer, and that's when he felt that this being actually told him either you go forward or backward. And so he stood there thinking and walked right past the figure. The fear sort of left him at that moment. Again, this is all incredibly bizarre. Now, the rest of Sergio's memory from that night is pretty vague. During his interview, he was asked if he had walked to the spot where he was found or if he had been transported there somehow. He wasn't sure. All he could remember were snippets where he seemed to cross vast distances in the blink of an eye. Sergio said that these moments were as though I was in the air. He also remembered passing animals, like young bulls, that didn't seem to be alarmed by his presence. In fact, he said that the bulls didn't move at all as he went past them. Well, the next thing that Sergio remembers is being alongside Provincial Route 1 without any idea of how he got there. Sergio explained that he had been waiting there since morning, and he had arrived there from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, just sitting and waiting with no one ever coming by, and his feet were so numb that they felt paralyzed. Apparently, they had told Sergio that if he waited there until the evening, that they would come back for him, and he expressed that this could happen to anybody and asked for people to believe his story. Needless to say, no one knew what to do with his testimony. It was both too wild and too vague to come to any real conclusion. But everybody could tell that regardless of what happened that night on March 2nd, 2006, Sergio Pucheta himself believed that he had been attacked by forces from beyond our reality. In the years to come, he found himself terrified to go out alone at night. In fact, his fear grew so intense that he was never able to return to work. He was forced into mandatory retirement. Now remember, Sergio had everything going for him. His career with the PD was on a trajectory that might have one day seen him made commissioner. Everybody thought the world of him. He was just starting a family. So I want you to ask yourself, why would he make all this up? What would he gain from something like this? And abandoning his duties in the middle of the night? And if you were trying to fake a UFO encounter, would you walk over a dozen miles to prove your point in the rain at night? It seems like something did happen to Sergio that night in Argentina. Now, whether it was some sort of psychotic break or something stranger is anyone's guess, but whatever the case, his life changed from that point forward. And folks, I want you to all remember that cases like this are not isolated, not by a long shot. In fact, to some of you watching, it probably won't be a surprise to learn that South America happens to be one of the largest UFO hotspots in the entire world. And I don't just mean UFO sightings, I'm talking strange light anomalies, alien abduction stories, bizarre military and government cover-ups. If there are interdimensional beings coming into this plane of existence, well, they certainly have a liking to South America. Maybe it's the climate, maybe it's the culture, maybe there's something far deeper that's tucked away and hidden from the public that we'll never know about. Unfortunately, the identity of the strange beings that harassed Sergio and the truth about what really happened to him that night will forever remain a mystery. And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment down below, "They followed me all night." So that way I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy this kind of content where we talk about strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural and in a storytelling format, then you should totally go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. And as always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.